Book 7, The Soldier in the Middle of the World, Chapter 10. I'm going to check out the forest for activity. The 5 weeks since he returned to Edge had been most eventful for Lieutenant Lekshin Thorne. He'd been there for 2 weeks, procrastinating returning to Idemia to begin command school, when an urgent message came from General Thorne. The pox was breaking out in huge numbers, and since the general had become sick as a young man, his son was susceptible as well and should stay far away. That was fine with Lek. Shortly after that, a crate arrived filled with books on command and tactics, along with a gold lieutenant's braid. The corporal had been promoted to Lieutenant Thorne. He was also expected to study on his own since the start of command school was delayed while the pox raged and the world continued to crumble. Reports from all over had been reaching General Thorne, and little of the news was good. Scouts verified that much of the northern half of the world was gone. Mount Seen, Quake, rivers, mid-plain, and vines were all buried under the new massive hill, which ran 30 miles to the south, sloping on the sides and tapering after mid-plain. Some had thought to call the new hill Sleeping Deceit, since the mountain had seemingly flopped useless like a drunk on the world. That's why others wanted to call it Drunken Deceit. Others suggested the Tomb, since it had buried so many thousands of people. Someone even suggested that slagging piece of mountain filth, but it didn't roll off the tongue easily. For now, it was called The Hill, the brief name feeling ominous on its own. Beyond the hill, debris from the mudslide rendered an immense swath of land down through Idemia unusable. However, there was some good news. The Idemian River was trickling again, cutting a new path on either side of the hill. On the west of the hill still remained scrub, covered in ash, and beyond that was sands virtually untouched. Except now the Edge River was running a mile to the north, creating a water shortage for the villages. The village of Grasses to the south was in better condition, and in the east coast fared well, except they hadn't harvested most of their crops, sure that someone would bring them something less dusty. Thorne sent a private message to his son that Sargon had indeed been in a far better position. In the south, the mudslide had traveled through the city to orchards, past trades, down to flax, and out to sea. But otherwise, the southern half of the world received only a few inches of ash. While the trees were wilting, crops were still growing. Still, Thorne ordered everyone in the south to harvest and preserve everything as quickly as possible. He didn't, however, tell them that the pox was on the move. Getting in the food was critical, the general confided to his son, because much of it would be needed in the north. If people thought they might catch the pox while they worked, they'd hide themselves away. It was logical to not concern them about a disease they had only a 1 in 3 chance of contracting. Lieutenant Thorne couldn't argue with that because the general's timing was correct. Just as the southern half of the world finished bringing in whatever they could, the pox exploded. The first outbreak in flax and marsh was reported a week after Thorne took over Idemia, and it was severe. 30 years ago there were deaths from the pox, but this time the losses were far greater, as if the plague was twice as strong as before. Lieutenant Thorne remembered what his brother Ralph had said about the estimated losses in Salem, and he wondered if he should warn the general that up to 1/5 of the remaining world might die. But that was just a guess. Perhaps many of the potentially susceptible families had already died in the eruption. And the lieutenant had to admit, the deaths from pox could be beneficial. Fewer mouths to feed would mean the food supplies would last longer. Perhaps the general hadn't been too off in his explanation that all the world needed was a few rams and ewes. The lieutenant just needed to make sure that he was one of those surviving rams. When he reported for duty each day at the fort, he made sure he kept on his kerchief, although he was sure he was immune. Every day at midday meal, the fort sent out a soldier to count the number of white and black cloths on the doors. White cloths meant pox was at the house, black meant there was a death. So far, the levels of illness had been staggering. 40% of Edge was ill, and 20% had died. Disposing of the bodies had been another problem the fort had to resolve, but nature had provided a way. The Edge River had been thrown from its course by the eruption, sending the new trickle of it on a parallel course to the west, a few hundred paces away. The old empty riverbed became a massive grave. Each night, first-year soldiers had the grisly task of burying the dozens of bodies brought that day. They'd already been using the riverbed as a burial place once it was realized that the residents of the grassy arena had all perished in the eruption, and the stench had died down enough for them to retrieve the bodies. Debris, possibly from another mudslide that came down the Edge River, littered the former grassy arena. It wasn't until the soldiers tasked with the gruesome job got closer that they realized bodies were covered in mud and entangled with the uprooted trees, bushes, and occasional boulders. As the lieutenant, Major Croup, and several other soldiers picked their way through the remains of the couple hundred Gracina boys and girls, Shinthorn felt a pang of guilt, which he quickly recovered from. He hadn't thought of anyone there since he'd left it, and those dead in the ash deserved to die. He, on the other hand, deserved better and got it. The lieutenant thought only once of Lolo. It's not as if she would have contributed anything to the rebuilding of the world. No vile head could. They just leached onto society, so their deaths were timely. Realizing that they must have been the very first to die, the lieutenant recognized once again the efficiency of nature's laws. Bodies not hopelessly entangled in the debris but found strewn elsewhere were carted to the old riverbed. Shortly after the soldiers finished that task, the first of the pox victims began to perish. For the past 5 weeks, Edge had been one continuous burial service. Today, the lieutenant was hoping the burials may be ending and wanted to make the counting of flags rounds himself. The sergeant yesterday reported that several white cloths had been taken down and that no new ones had gone up. And the lieutenant was wanting to escape the fort for a while. Maybe because he noticed the date that morning as he was dressing. The 10th day of harvest. Young Perrinshin's 19th birthday. But Lieutenant Thorne had turned 27 a couple of seasons ago, a few weeks before Selima Brighter Zenas did. He slipped on his old corporal's jacket, still bearing the name of Shin, since no one could be found to stitch him a thorn patch. The general had suggested the lieutenant wear Thorne's old uniform, but the sleeves were too short and the jacket too tight. He considered removing the Thorne label for his jacket, but Edge still regarded the shin patch with respect and fear, so he kept it. As he took long strides towards the gates of the fort, he enjoyed the triumph of being saluted, the pleasure of watching the enlisted scatter, the pride of causing citizens to pause and stare. He had everything: power, influence, and respect. How the old colonel could have given all of this up years ago was still beyond his comprehension. Occasionally, he still heard the colonel, but his droning about doing the right things had become so tiresome that the lieutenant shut him out. But sometimes he was caught off guard, such as when he sat in the quiet mansion late at night, thumbing through a dull text, and the words, "The Estates is a lot more noisy and entertaining than this is," would suddenly form in his mind. When he sat down to dinner alone in the grand eating room, the words, "What this place needs is a well-thrown roll," boorishly barged into his meal. And when he walked from the mansion to the fort, the canyon within his view, the words, "Wonder what they're doing over there today," forced themselves into his thoughts. Each time he'd shake them off, forgetting about the voice until it rudely interrupted again. He rather anticipated the voice would come today, it being a significant date for some people, but no longer for him. "So, is it appropriate to wish you a happy 19th birthday, or have you changed your birth date as well?" "Only if you got me a gift, old man," he mumbled as he walked along the barren field outside the fort gates. "I'll give you a gift. I'll show you the way home." The lieutenant sighed. "Ugh, give me a gift of something new. Can't you think of anything else to say?" "Oh, I can think of plenty. But until you listen to what I say first, I can't tell you what I have to say next." The lieutenant grumbled. "The forest's quiet. Have you noticed?" "Yes," he lied, I was thinking about recommending to Major Twig that he should send someone out to see what's happening there. Ah, but that's against the long-standing rules that no soldiers should enter the forests. That was your great-grandfather's admonition, after all. The lieutenant narrowed his eyes. Great-grandfather? Yes, Cush. He loved the uniform, but nothing of army life except the dinners and dances. He especially hated conflict, danger, and going into the forest. The lieutenant rolled his eyes. Not my great-grandfather. Really? I thought you were a thorn, therefore a Cush, and a shin, maybe a brider when it's convenient, maybe a pedo. What do you want? He asked shortly. I want you to look at the forest. Why? It's dying. Yes. Isn't that troubling? We can still burn the wood or use it for construction. But it's all blackening, Lieutenant. Sure, it's still there, but are there any markings? The lieutenant slowed his gait. Doesn't matter, does it? Why don't you go see? Check out the forest. No one's watching anymore, are they? Not really, he confessed. I haven't seen much need to patrol it with all the Gracina people dead and no one else interested in it. Then go to the forest this morning before you report to the command tower, just to take a look. I know what you're trying to do. You'll get me up there, then you'll make me go further and further until I'm halfway up the mountain. No, young pair. Do you mind if I still call you young pair? Lek Thorn makes me gag, and considering that I don't have a physical body anymore, that's quite an accomplishment. No, young pair, I don't want you to go halfway up the mountain. I want you to go up and over it. You could do it today. The path is navigable. Go get Clark. I know that's not what you named him, but he's a descendant of the first Clark, and that's a far better name than what you settled on. You could be over the mountain before dinner. You've never missed a birthday dinner yet. This year has been unbearably difficult for them. You can change it. Change it all. Young pair, are you still listening to me? Lieutenant Thorne walked through the gates and over to the stables. Saddle up, Trigger, he said to the stable hands. I'm going to check out the forest. We really should be observing it closer. Send a messenger to Major Twig about my doings. I may be a few hours. Yes. No one was quite sure what to do with or for Lila Shin that day, but Mari, Kala, and Salima were working on a plan. The day had been creeping up on them, hard to ignore, especially when Cephas celebrated his 19th birthday just days before. But ignoring the day didn't seem right either. It had been a bookend week for the past 18 years. All the family gathered for one birthday dinner, then again a few days later for the next. Whatever someone wanted but didn't get at Cephas's dinner party would find it at Young Pear's. But Cephas's dinner party was a somber affair, not only because of the volcano and the absence of his biggest aggravation, his cousin, but because everything in Salem was grave. Even with the great care taken to reduce exposure to the pox, it hit Salem with full force 2 weeks after the eruption. Guide Zenas called for mass quarantines of anyone susceptible, and Salem ground to a halt, the ash-to-block yard temporarily abandoned. The doctor's estimates that 1/3 in Salem could fall ill and that half of those might die were blessedly lower, probably because of the quarantine. But Salem was still devastated. 30% of Salem became feverish and pocked. 45,000 sick people brought the valley to its knees, and suddenly it was a blessing that so many crops and livestock had perished in the eruption. There was barely enough healthy people to take care of everyone and their animals. With the careful attention to those ill, the death rates were also lower than initially feared. Of the 45,000 who became ill, 18,000 died. Shem was grateful, but that was still 400 burials a day, and more than 500 during the worst week. Reluctantly, and at Mari's reminder that he'd already seen himself in vision doing it, Shem called for mass graves to be dug. the dead from each day to be brought to the pits for burial. He promised that each person would be remembered on a large marker to be placed at the graves. In the cases where entire families died, he ordered their houses burned along with their possessions in hopes of killing the pox. If Salem had seemed gray and dreary when it was covered in ash, it became even worse with the smoke from another house being destroyed and new pits being dug to receive the remains of those who would die the next day. Somber wasn't nearly a heavy enough term to describe the mood in Salem, Murray decided one day. It bordered on despondent. There were moments when she felt truly sorry that she'd been so delighted that the last day was coming. She'd even memorized the passage in the writings as a sort of checklist as to what should come next. Before the last day will be a land tremor more powerful than any ever experienced. It will awaken the largest mountain and change all that we know in the world. Those changes will bring famine, death, and desperation to the world. And that desperation will cause the world's army to seek to destroy the faithful of the Creator. Largest mountain awakened? Check. Change all that we know? Check. Famine? Maybe check. The pox might be it. It certainly was death and desperation. That Murray considered those words so detachedly, as if making a list for the storehouse, alarmed her. People were suffering, and she was merely counting down the days in happy anticipation. Her own awfulness surprised her, but all she had to do to jar her back into reasonableness was look at Shem. He lived Salem's suffering, spending weeks making rounds all over Salem and the northern colonies, trying to visit each burial pit, trying to comfort every weeping parent, child, and spouse. But it took its toll. After 3 weeks of endless traveling, he collapsed in exhaustion as he arrived home one evening. Calla and Pato assured him that the Salemites knew he shared in their grief, and that he had a dozen assistants and over 300 rectors who could provide comfort as well. Reluctantly, he agreed to slow his pace. Calla stayed by his side while he slept that night and well into the next day, worriedly feeling his forehead and watching for any signs of pox. Even though it was assumed their family was immune, Bosco's had become feverish and achy for 2 days after attending nonstop to dozens of ailing families. The estates weren't entirely immune. For almost 4 weeks while the pox raged through Salem, dropping families left and right, no one was in or out of the Briders' house except for Dec and Jatesy. Jatesy had panicked when, 5 days after Cambo had taken Murray to the Blockfields, he awoke with a high fever and hallucinations. His wife Tessina immediately sent for Jatesy, and soon Cambo was carried by Dec and Pato to the Shin's house. Since the original Cambozola Brider, a healthy farmer in his prime, had passed away with his wife Susie within hours of developing the pox fever, the younger Cambo's parents weren't going to take any chances. Murray and Lilla cared for Cambo in isolation in young pair's empty bedroom until he finally broke out in spots 3 days later and the fever abated. Since all schools and university were closed due to illness, Murray had plenty of time to worry about her oldest grandson. She put her unreasonable joy on the back shelf so she could fret full-time with everyone else in Salem. Jatesy and Dec were the only Briders anyone saw for those weeks. They retrieved goods from the storehouse, tended to the animals, and checked several times each day on their oldest son at the Shins. But no one else saw their other children or grandchildren until the threat had passed. By the time Cephas Brider's birthday rolled around, the pox was fading in Salem. No new cases had been reported, and the Briders felt free to step outside and breathe the air again. Jatesy said it couldn't have happened soon enough. During one frustrating day, Jatesy confided to her mother, as she dabbed her oldest son's hot head, that if 1 or 2 particular children fell ill with a fever for a few days and were as still as poor Cambo, she wouldn't have minded. So when harvest season came, it was not only appropriate but necessary to celebrate everyone's liberation and Cambo's recuperation by having the families together for Cephas's birthday. But Cephas wasn't sure about that. He suggested to his mother that they not have a birthday dinner for him that year, considering everything. He'd still turn 19 if they celebrated it or not. When Lilla overheard their conversation, she insisted that Cephas would have his dinner and everyone would come and be happy or else. And considering the extreme agitation of Lilla, they decided to avoid that or else. To prepare for Cephas's birthday and Lilla's potential response to it, Mari held a secret meeting at the Zenas' house a week before young Pear's birthday. Mari invited Shem, Kala, Salima, Lek, and Boscos to help figure out what to do with, for, or to Lilla. Honestly, Salima said to the others as they sat around the table in the kitchen, Aunt Lilla's making Mama really nervous. She came over 3 times today with suggestions for Cephas's dinner. Now she's insisting on cooking it herself, and it sounds like there'll be enough food for everyone in the congregation. Uncle Pato promised to rein her in, but I don't think he knows how. Mugga and I have spoken to almost all the Shins since I saw Jory and Lori 2 days ago, and everyone says the same thing. Lilla's got them worried, and they're afraid she'll do something alarming on the 10th. More alarming than usual, that is, Mari added. Kala rested her head on her hand. I knew when young Pear's birthday would come she'd be a mess, but I thought she'd just wail and cry a lot. I can help her with that. I just didn't expect her to be so... Failing to find an apt description, she turned to her husband. Shem shrugged. She's wearing the fakest smile I've ever seen, and she's trying to force everyone else to feel happy as well. She's almost creepy in her insistence that everything is fine, he said with an apologetic wince to his wife. Boss, any professional suggestions? Boscos exhaled. We have very little experience with this in Salem. I couldn't find a reference in any of the books of how someone copes when a family member had run away. The few who left usually had little or no connections to miss them. We tended to be involved in the taking, Papa, not the losing. Sorry, he added when he saw the pained expression on his father's face. Most of the taking in the world had been Shem's doing. Mari nodded sadly. This is one thing the world knows more about than we do. How, on their birthday, do we remember the one who is missing? They all looked at the table for an answer. Brutally happy, Lex said quietly. Everyone turned to him. He looked up to see his family's confused expressions. I was just thinking about Mama's label for Aunt Lilla. Brutally happy? That's about as close as we're going to get, Shem agreed. I've been thinking, Mari said, that she needs a distraction, yet still some way to acknowledge his birthday. But what? Kala asked. I don't even know how to talk to her about it. I've tried a few times, but as soon as I say the word birthday, she starts going on and on about Cephas. She's becoming obsessive. And when his birthday's over, then what will she become? They all fell silent again, thinking. Bossy, Lex said quietly. Everyone looked at him again. He fidgeted. He hated being the center of attention, and now he'd been it twice. Salima elbowed him gently. Usually you only call me Bossy. Lek blushed. No, that's not what I meant. I was thinking about Bossy, one of the cows. A year or 2 ago, she had that calf, the one that died right after it was born. I remember, Shem said. She was distraught, and the only way Det could calm her was find another calf. Bossy just needed something to replace what she lost. Mari tapped her lips. Somehow, I suspect Lilla will notice if we slip another 19-year-old into young Pear's room and dress him up in his clothes. Nor is she overly fond of calves in the house. Everyone chuckled sadly. Kala said, I know what you mean, though, Lek, and that's what she's been doing to poor Jatesy with Cephas, adopting him as her own. Boscos nodded. She's connecting to the closest thing who reminds her of her own son. You know, Kala said, her eyes getting brighter, Jory is getting closer to birthing, isn't she? Salima bobbed her head back and forth. She is, but I think she still has 3 weeks to go. Mari started grinning. Shem pointed at her. You're planning something, most dangerous woman, and I don't think I'm going to like it. Mari glared playfully at him before turning to Kala. Do you think Jory's baby might be a girl? Kala shrugged. I try not to work my power until it's a week before the baby's due, but maybe I can make an exception. The loud scoffing of Shem stopped her. Oh, Kala, we've talked about this before. I really don't think you have any special power. You just have excellent timing. Kala was affronted. For a man with as much faith as you have very little in me. Her children and daughter-in-law chuckled, but Salima shrugged. I have to agree, Mama Kala. You probably just have good timing when you put your hands on a swollen belly and a little girl is born the next day. I don't think there's anything you do but bring hope. But isn't that what expecting mothers need? Hope, said Lek. Salima had to chuckle at that. Yes, it is. Mari pointed at them. Exactly. If there's ever been an expecting mother in need of hope, it's Lila. She's expecting the arrival of her son every day. She needs something. Shem sat back. What are you planning, Mari? Nothing drastic, she assured him. But what if Jory just pretends to be close to birthing? Kala, what if you visit her the day before, do your little belly-holding thing, then on the morning of young Pear's birthday, she sends for Lila to help her because she thinks the baby may be coming. She could drag it out all day long. Shem was shaking his head so hard it was amazing it stayed on. But Salima was grinning at her grandmother. I'm sure she'd do it. Jory and Lori are more worried about their mother than anyone. Jory's been through it enough to know what symptoms to fake. I could send her some ideas, though. I don't believe what I'm hearing, Shem exclaimed. You women are creating a lie. Well, I expect this kind of behavior from Mari. Mari scoffed. What's that supposed to mean? She demanded, as Lek and Boscos tried to stifle their laughs. But Salima, my daughter-in-law. Salima blushed and shrugged at Shem. Sorry, Guide Zenas, but I still think it's a good idea. Shem gave her a forgiving wink, but continued to shake his head at Mari. He didn't notice the far-off look on his wife. It really could work, Kala said softly. Shem twisted to her. What? Just as a distraction, Shem, Kala explained. Something to do. Help with the grandchildren, clean the houses, pet the lambs, count the minutes between the pains, and then it all stops. We've all been through that, false labor. What would it hurt? Shem stared at her with his mouth hanging open. Boscos gently pushed up his father's chin. Mari snorted into her arm. My wife, my gentle, kind, honest wife, concocting a lie? Shem said. In Salem? For the first time ever, Mari saw Kala roll her eyes. Do you have a better idea? Because you haven't said anything helpful. It was the first time Mari had ever heard Kala raise her voice. By the surprised look on her sons, it was the first time they'd heard her angry as well. This is my baby sister, Shem. I need to help her. Mama's not well enough to come down, and after Lila smothers poor Jatsi and Cephas, who knows what she's going to do next? Probably something to Pato. We haven't even discussed him yet. The more aggressive she gets, the more introverted he becomes. And what are we going to do with him on that day? Besides, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, who are you to lecture me on honesty? I don't know of another man who told more lies in his life than you, and yes, for good reasons. Mari and Salima exchanged the same look. They wondered if they could get up and sneak out of the room unnoticed. Shem's eyebrows went up at his wife's words. This is hardly the same thing. And what are you planning to do to Pato? Another dishonest distraction? I think Rector Shin is dealing with enough real problems without you creating a new one for him to chase. Lek cringed in worry as he watched his parents. Boscos noticed his brother's concern and knew he had to break the tension. He winked at Mari and said, "We could send Uncle Pato on a chase. Tell him someone saw Aunt Mari sneaking out again, but this time she was headed to the volcano just for a peek." Shem's mouth dropped open again, and he stared at his second son. Now it was Mari's turn to lean over and push his chin back up. "I think he's just teasing, Shem," Mari said, "although I would like to take a peek." Boscos pointed at his father. "I am just teasing, Papa, because I think you're taking this too seriously. What's the harm in giving Aunt Lila something useful to do? I think if Lila's occupied, Uncle Pato will handle everything better. He's closing up because he doesn't know how to help his wife. But if she's helped, he'll do better." Shem sighed and turned to Lek. "And your suggestion is?" Lek glanced around the table. "Agree with my wife. That's always the safest thing to do, I've found." Salima smiled in triumph and kissed him on the cheek. "I have him trained so well." Boscos pounded on the table. "Hear, hear. I always find it safest when we all agree with Salima." "Hey," said Salima, as Mari chuckled and Kala smiled. Shem's face finally softened. "You're right, Lek. Agree with your wife as often as you can." He put a hand on Kala's and squeezed it. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Lek sighed in relief. Mari pursed her lips. It was all over much too fast. She and Perrin would have had it out for at least another 10 minutes to let things get really interesting before one of them developed that glint in their eyes. But then that's why Perrin never would have been called to be the guide. "But Kala," Shem said, "I do have a useful suggestion. We have another Remembrance Day, but for young pair." Mari frowned. "Oh, I don't think I like the idea of—" "I don't mean like the night we had for Perrin," he interrupted, and began to smile just thinking about it. "I mean a more sober day, with the family fast the day before, and a combined family prayer for him the morning of his birthday," Shem explained, "to show Pato and Lila that we feel with them and for them. Together we can ask the Creator to sustain us until it's all resolved." Kala kissed his shoulder. "That's an excellent idea, Shem." Mari sighed. She had to agree it had its merits. "But Shem," Kala said quietly, "if during the day she becomes uncontrollably agitated—" Salima raised one eyebrow in expectation. The guide sighed. "Then you may check on Jory and send along a message through the tower so Lila can visit her grandchildren." Mari smiled, pretending that she too was awaiting his approval, but she was going to stage a get Lila out of the house day if she'd had his agreement or not. So it was her task on the 10th of harvest to keep an eye on Lila. At the earliest sign of Lila losing it, Mari would secretly send 17-year-old Newell on horseback to his sister's houses on the other side of Salem. He would give Jory and Lori an update so they could send an urgent message to the tower calling for assistance. Jory had been growing very large and uncomfortable. At Cephas's birthday dinner, she could hardly find a comfortable position in which to sit. Mari wondered if Jory might not have been playing up her condition a little to divert Lila's attentions away from Jatesy. Mari was sure she saw Jory give her Aunt Jatesy a wink, and when the Cadby families climbed into their wagons for a bumpy ride home, Jatesy whispered into Jory's ear and squeezed her arm. To spare Jory and Lori from another long ride with their large bellies, they didn't join the combined families on the morning of the 10th, but promised they would pray for young pair at the same time. Shem's idea had proven to be a good one, as Mari had to admit she knew it would be. Bringing everyone together on behalf of young pair had a soothing balm for the entire day. Everyone still thought of him, worried about him, and Lila and Pato were reminded how much their pain was shared and felt. Still, Mari had her doubts, and even though Lila was calmer than she'd been in the past 2 weeks, she still seemed to Mari like a short-tempered cat, lying in wait to reach out and slash someone's leg just because they passed by. The night before young Pear's birthday, Mari put her arm around Lila. "Just so you know, I'm not going to leave you alone tomorrow unless it's with Calla. No one wants you to be alone, and no one dares to be alone with you, so you're stuck with me and your sister." Lila at first chuckled, then sobbed. "I think you might be the only one who really understands." Mari was waiting by Pato and Lila's bedroom when it opened in the morning. Lila came out to start breakfast, and Mari put an arm around her and wiped away her first tears of the day. After their combined family prayer and breakfast, Lila seemed to be holding up all right, but was frequently weepy. Pato, however, was Shem's special assignment. The two of them rode to the southeast to check on the latest delivery of blocks and to give Pato plenty of time to chat with Shem. In the mid-afternoon, when Calla came over to relieve Mari on Lila duty, Mari was beginning to think that Lila might be all right. The blessing that Shem asked for, that the family would feel comfort and hope, seemed to be sinking in. Mari strolled over to the Brighter house to check on young Shem's math when Jatsi met her at the door. "Is she that bad?" Mari looked at her in surprise. "Lila? No, she's doing quite well. Why?" Jatsi nodded to the tower where a line of banners was rising. "Emergency, Rector Shin, second resting station." Mari frowned. "That's not the right message for Lila." "Wait. Second resting station? Oh, Jatsi, you don't think..." Jatsi's eyebrows creased. "Mother, what are you thinking?" She could hardly breathe. "It's his birthday. What if he came home on his birthday?" Jatsi took her mother by the shoulders. "I really don't think so. That would just be too..." But someone else had already had the same idea. They both heard the scream from the Shin's house and turned to see Lila come bolting out the door with Calla on her heels. "Mari! Jatsi! The tower message!" Calla was shaking her head in time with Jatsi's. "Lila, really, I don't think it's..." Lila ran straight for Mari, who wore the same hopeful expression. "It would be perfect," she panted as she reached her mother-in-law. "For him to come home today? Oh, Mari, can you imagine?" "You shouldn't," Calla said firmly, catching her sister. "Lila, the message is for Pato. It's the General's banner, so it's a security issue." The tower chimed, signaling they should look up again. The guide's banner had gone up as well, calling for him to help. Calla furrowed her eyebrows at that. "Shem, too?" Lila shook her sister. "It's him! It has to be!" "Stop!" Calla ordered. "Lila, you must stop. I can't believe it's what you hope for." She called up to the tower. "They went to the block storage barns in the southeast. Send along the message to the towers there." The men nodded down to her. Calla gripped her sister firmly by the shoulders. "Lila, listen to me. It's not young Pear. He's not coming home today." "Why are you saying that?" Lila shouted at her. "How can you be so sure? You don't know." "But Lila, I feel it," said Calla in her best calming tone. "Sweetie, it's not him. It's likely a problem with the Thorns. They still live at the second resting station and would call for both Pato and Shem." The look on Lila's face told her she didn't believe any of that. Calla sighed. "You need to get out for a while, and I know exactly what you need. We'll get Newell and Q to hitch up the wagon, then you and I are going to go visit some very large and expecting daughters. While we're there, we'll wash all the laundry and clean every inch of their houses and cook several days' worth of food until you're exhausted and it's the 11th. All right?" Lila's chin quivered. "Can we go to the second resting station first, just to see?" Jatsi grimaced again in sympathy, and Mari held her breath, her hands balled up in anxious yet hopeful fists by her face. Calla sighed. Sure, whatever you need. Thank you, Lilla squealed. She ran back to the house calling, Newell, Q, ready the wagon, quickly. Calla's shoulders sagged. What am I going to do for her when she sees it's not him? But it might be, Calla, Mari insisted. Jatsi put an arm around her mother. I'll keep this one under control, Calla. Good luck with that one, she said, nodding to Lilla, who was now dragging her 2 sons to the large barn. She was shouting about just saddling the horses so they could travel faster. Calla smiled feebly at Jatsi and walked over to the large barn, rubbing her behind in anticipation. There wasn't even going to be time to change into breeches or find padding for the saddle. And that's the end of that chapter. Thank you.